This is Polarized Light Microscopy in Archaeology, and this is a story about a Zapotec urn. So, in 1914, the Royal Ontario Museum opened in Toronto. The first director, Charles Corelli, was an archaeologist and wanted to, quite literally, bring the ages home. His autobiography recounts how he planned to create a representative collection of the world's ancient cultures in the ROM. But one thing the ROM was short on was material from the ancient cultures Mesoamerica. So in 1919, Corelli took the train to Mexico City. There was an abundance of ancient material available, with objects related to the Olmecs, later material from central Mexico, from Teotihuacan, the Toltecs, and the Aztecs, together with material from the Maya region. But what especially interested him was material from Oaxaca. This is due to a man called Constantine Rickards, a British diplomat who had sold and donated pieces to major museums in Europe and the United States. Corelli therefore thought Rickards could be trusted to provide material that was free of fakes or forgeries, even if it was not known precisely where they were found. Rickards offered Corelli a collection of some 1,500 pieces of Zapotec art from Oaxaca that was dated stylistically to the first half of the first millennium of the Common Era. The highlight of the Rickards collection was a group of 120 Zapotec urns, also known as effigy vessels, or jars, or funerary urns and things like this. The objects capture the religious ideas that structured life in one of Mexico's earliest states. Looking at the back of this one, you can see the core of the figure was a columnar urn, which is why they're called vessels, jars, or urns rather than just being figures. It should be said that the Zapotecs were not just an ancient culture. Their language and people continue to this day, and they remain the people of this land. The bulk of the population in ancient times, as in the present, live in the Central Valley, surrounded by rugged uplands. Monte Alban was a primary site in ancient times, while in the present day Oaxaca City is the largest settlement in the region, but there are many sites in the alluvial lowland. The ROM's Zapotec figural urns are all of unknown origin, but others have been found in context in subsequent excavations. Some even show traces of paint. They are found in funerary shrines associated with tombs and graves within households. Typically, each house is built next to a courtyard, with increasing number of rooms around the courtyard. The tombs are multi-generational and are reopened, and the previous occupants pushed aside to receive the latest interment. Fragments of figural urns are found from earlier burials, and the most recent phase will have a display of whole urns placed together. Even Monte Alban shows a similar arrangement of shrines and occupation. The ROM objects were, however, tested for authenticity using thermoluminescence, beginning in 1977. As it turned out, 2/3 of them were found to be made recently, and so are fakes. This urn, however, is a different story. Here, with an old photo and a more recent photo, you can see parts have become unattached, and it is obvious that these parts do not actually belong to the original piece. In fact, quite a lot of it looks wrong to an archaeological ceramicist's view. So a ROM conservator started taking the object apart, removing pieces of ceramic that had been attached to the original object. And this, on the left, is the result. Some fragments of pottery that were removed looked like they were ancient fragments from another object ground to fit this one. Others seem to be made specifically to fit the original but broken object. 10 distinct samples were obtained from the various parts of the object and subjected to petrographic analysis. We were also able to sample a further object from the Ethnologische Museum in Berlin. This is considered stylistically to be similar, but not sufficiently similar to necessarily be made in the same location as the Rom urn. So, in the Rom urn, there are two petrofabric groups which are similar. They're called ZU because that means Zapotec Urn. ZU1 seems to be from parts of a similar ancient object, and ZU2 is from the core of the original object. That is most of what the rest of the object is based on. Similarities include a bimodal distribution of inclusions, with a quartz-rich fine silt dominating the fine fraction, and granophyre and felsic volcanics significant in the coarse fraction. The core of the object, ZU2, having slightly less granophyre and felsic volcanic. The Berlin urn is a moderately similar petrofabric to ZU1 and Z2. It too is bimodal with a similar fine fraction, but the coarse fraction comprises 7% felsic volcanics and has no granophyre. The Rom urn has no recorded information about a fine spot, but the Berlin urn was said to have been found at Jojokotlan, near Monte Alban. However, the Berlin collection seems to have been acquired in a similar fashion as the Rom collection, and similarly contains a significant number of complete fakes. So the attribution may be, at best, questionable. Although there have been a number of thin section studies of Oaxacan pottery, granophyre seems to have not been reported elsewhere. It has, however, been reported in the geology itself at the 300-meter wide La Carbonera stock intrusion, and in similar intrusions elsewhere in Oaxaca, reflecting a limited but widespread magmatism. The La Carbonera stock only seems to have been discovered because a road had been built right through it. And as it dates to about 275 million years ago, similar inclusions will only be found in this Precambrian basement. Extensive felsic volcanic rocks and the Precambrian basement, which may include small inclusions of the granophyre, can be found here in the south around Ahutla. Coincidentally, this is where the ROM's research associate and expert on the Zapotec, Adam Selin, thought that this urn was made. I should add that I did not know that before I told him where I thought it was made. None of the earlier thin section studies covered this area. This otherwise useful topographic map showing the high relief around the Oaxaca Valley, for example, does not cover Ahutla, which is down here. The bimodal distribution of grain size, meaning that the graph has two modes, can be explained by the position of Ahutla as being close to the uplands. Bimodal distributions have been thought to be from mixing of raw materials by potters, but in fact nature can mix raw materials pretty easily itself. The fine fraction could be from the main river, and the coarse fraction could be washed down from weathering of the surrounding uplands. Petrofabric 4 is found in an ancient plaque fragment attached to the figure's headdress. A mould was taken of this plaque to make copies of it, which were attached to the figure's apron to make it look more coherent. High clinopyroxene, amphibole and biotite content distinguishes it from all of the others. This is also unlike any published petrofabric from previous studies, and there is really nowhere within the area that seems geologically compatible. Finally, petrofabric 3 represent all the parts that seem to have been fabricated in order to fit the broken object, most likely by a restorer in the early 20th century. It is characterized by inclusions of potassic feldspars, plagioclase, and perthite, often polymineralic inclusions that would indicate that the source is a quartz syenite or quartz monzonite. This is a QAP diagram, a ternary diagram that shows the relative proportions of quartz, alkali feldspars, and plagioclase feldspars. So this is where the proportions of the inclusions in this petrofabric sit, being a mostly plagioclase alkali feldspars with some quartz. This would actually be appropriate to the Precambrian Oaxaca complex, and is actually a petrofabric found in earlier studies from Monte Alban, and also the present-day production center at nearby Santa Maria at Zompa. This actually makes a lot of sense, as the ceramic parts have been skillfully made, and so would have been manufactured by actual potters. To this day, there are a number of workshops in Santa Maria Zompa, making everything from camal and turines to ornate figural objects that are acquired by international collectors of folk art. You might notice that a lot of the manufacturing is done by women. Raw materials seem to be partly a clay found locally and another brought in by truck from another nearby village. It is processed by the men and fired in stone and adobe kilns built in the courtyard of their houses. So that is the story of the Rom's Oaxacan urn. It's an interesting story of ancient objects made to fit ancient cultures and their spiritual world. A number of objects, it seems, ended up in this particular urn, and also the present day sustaining potters of the region that assisted the dealers in making the object more whole and more attractive to the market. They probably also made the complete fakes, as it turns out, using basically the same techniques as the ancient Oaxacans. So this is the last lecture, and I hope you had a nice time. Bye-bye.